Today we're talking about phone photography and about things you can do to take the quality of your photos and videos to the next level. What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Luka and I'm a full-time stock photographer and videographer. If you want to level up the quality of your photos and videos and sell them online, subscribe to my channel for even more videos like this. Today we're going to talk about phone photography and videography, especially how to take your phone photos and videos to the next level. Because I have so much information to share, I decided to split this topic into two videos. In the first one, we'll talk about shooting. Things like composition, lighting, camera settings, and in the next one, which will be out in a few days, I'll talk about mobile apps and some gear that can make your photos and videos even better. Okay, let's get started. Tip number 1, clean your camera lens. Okay, this one might seem obvious, but it's very important. For example, when people give me their phones to take a picture of them, around 80% of the time the lenses on their phones are dirty. We keep our phones in our pockets or purses all the time, we're touching them with our fingers, so the lenses on these devices are usually not clean. And if you're taking photos with a dirty lens, the image can turn out to be faded or not so sharp. That's why it's important to clean your lens first. Just blow off the dust and use a soft cloth or t-shirt to wipe the lens. Tip number 2. Use rule of thirds and leading lines to get more interesting photos. Rule of thirds is probably the most fundamental rule in photography. It will help you to capture more balanced and interesting shots. To follow the rule of thirds in your photos, you must imagine your photo divided into 9 rectangles with 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines. Well, let me tell you a secret. You don't actually have to imagine that, because you can turn on the grid in your phone camera app and you have those lines on the screen all the time. So, when you're shooting, put the most important elements of the photo on one of those lines or intersections. Let me give you a few examples. In nature shots, put the horizon on one of the horizontal lines. If there's an interesting sky that you want to capture, put the horizon on the bottom line, and if there's an interesting foreground, put the horizon on the top line. It also works great with shooting people. When you're taking a portrait, try to put the person's eyes on one of the top intersections and your image will be much more balanced. But you don't have to use rule of thirds all the time. Of course, you can break the rule if you know why. You can place your subject in the center of the frame, especially when you're using leading lines, for example. Leading lines are another powerful compositional element which can significantly improve your photos. Let me tell you how. Leading lines in your photos lead viewers' eyes from one part of the image to the other part, the one that's most important, and you want the viewer to focus on it. Or sometimes lines can just lead to infinity, to a vanishing point. Leading lines are great for creating strong composition. Most common examples of leading lines are roads, railroad tracks, and bridges. Although these parallel lines that go into the distance have a strong visual impact, leading lines don't have to be so strong and obvious. They can also be of different shapes and they can go in different directions. So, by following the rule of thirds and finding and using leading lines, you'll instantly create better looking images. Tip number 3, search for different angles. Trust me, you don't want to shoot everything from the eye level. Images shot from this perspective usually look ordinary, nothing special. Try to experiment with different angles. Crouch down and shoot from below, go higher and shoot from above, and try to find some other unusual angles and perspectives. If your phone has more cameras, experiment with different focal lengths and get creative using those. You can get some very different looking images using your wide or telephoto lens instead of just using the normal one. Tip number 4 goes together with the previous tip, and that is shoot through objects. Having a foreground or something very close to your lens can make your photos much more interesting than just capturing a clean shot of your subject. You can use all types of foreground elements, from branches, leaves, fences, frames, glasses, and so on. With DSLR cameras this works great, because foreground's usually very blurred and not recognizable, but you can get some interesting shots with your phone too. Using foreground is especially useful when you're shooting video, because if you're panning from left to right, foreground is moving much faster than the background and you'll get a unique perspective. Tip number 5. Pay attention to light. The importance of light in photography is huge. So, when you're taking photos, wherever you are, just look around to see where the light is coming from. It can be an indoor lamp, window, or the sun outdoors. If you're shooting people, there are two things that I recommend. The best way to place the light is that it comes from the side or from 45 degrees to the person, like here for example. That way you'll get some nice shadows on the other side of the face and you'll create depth in your image. And the other thing is that for shooting people, soft diffuse lighting usually works better than hard light. If you're shooting indoors, just move closer to the window. That way you'll get a lot of light and it will light the person evenly. If you're outdoors and it's a sunny day, try to find shade to avoid harsh light. Or you can also find a bright surface lit by the sun and place the person next to it. In this case, the surface will act like a giant light source and will softly light the shadow areas of the person. But don't get me wrong, also hard light can be good in some cases. For example, in fashion industry, they use it quite a lot. If you're not shooting people, you can get creative with shadows. Shoot things from an angle that will show both the illuminated and shaded side of an object. That will add depth to your image. Also, another tip that can go a long way is to shoot at golden hour. And what's golden hour? It's time right after the sunrise and before the sunset. There are a lot of apps and online calculators which can help you to find out when golden hour is at your place. Check it, stick to that, and you'll get some amazing looking images. At golden hour, everything just looks incredible. From nature to lifestyle images with people. The light at golden hour is softer than during the day. It has this nice orange glow, so everything just looks so much better. You can also light the subject from the back and you can capture some amazing lens flares. Tip number 6. Don't use flash. Okay, I'm curious. How many of you have the flash set to auto in your camera app? If you do, just type me down in the comment section. If you still have flash set to auto in your camera app, go in there and turn it off right now. Why? Let me tell you. Well, there are situations where using flash can be a good idea, but probably not the ones that you're thinking of. Flash on your phone will usually get you very bad results. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're shooting a city scene in the evening and there's a concrete fence 1 meter in front of you. The scene looks great, the light is awesome, but it's a little bit dark. So your phone of course turn on the flash. And what you will get is illuminated or maybe even overexposed fence in the front, and the background, which should be the main subject of the image, will be dark. And the same happens if you shoot a person. Usually you want to show the surroundings where the person is, but if the phone evaluates that it's too dark and turns on the flash, only the person will be illuminated or even overexposed and the background will be dark. Flash just kills all the atmosphere of the situation. That's why you want to avoid flash. If you shoot the same scene without flash, yeah, of course, image might be a little bit more grainy because the low light performance of your camera is not very good, but you'll preserve the ambient, the mood of the image, which I think is much more important. So, when should you use flash? Well, this might surprise you, but good time to use flash is actually on a bright sunny day. If there are too harsh shadows on your subject, you can turn on the flash to brighten those shadows to get more details in those shadowed areas. Tip number 7. Don't use digital zoom, ever. I see a lot of people using zoom on their phones, but let me tell you why that's not a good idea. Okay, one thing is if your phone has more cameras. For example, in iPhone 11 there are 3 cameras and you can choose different zooming options. And that's totally fine because a phone uses a different camera for each of these zooming options. But if you would like to zoom in even more, just don't do it. Why? Because your phone will use digital zoom instead of optical zoom. And that's the same as taking photo without zooming in and cropping it later in post-production. You're actually losing quality. The more you're zooming in, the less pixels your image will have and more pixelated it will be. That's why it's better to move closer to your subject, or if you can't for any reason, just take a photo without zooming in, and you can always crop it later if you want to. Tip number 8. Shoot in manual mode. If you want to take better images, I suggest you learn some basics and shoot in manual mode. So, let me tell you some things that you should know. In photography, there are 3 main things that you can adjust to achieve correct exposure. Those are aperture, shutter speed and ISO. These settings form so-called exposure triangle. When elements of the triangle are in balance, you'll get the correctly exposed image. And when you adjust one element of the triangle, you'll need to adjust at least one more to keep the correct exposure. I'll not go deep into this, but just so you can understand this a little bit better. Okay, phone camera has fixed aperture, so you don't have any control over that. And that leaves us just two elements that you can control, and those are shutter speed and ISO. And what are those? Shutter speed tells us how long the light will be hitting the camera sensor. So, if the shutter speed is slow, for example 1 second, you'll get a blurry image, because the camera will capture everything that was happening in that second. With slow shutter speed, you can capture light trails at night, or you can get that silky water on waterfalls, or some other cool things. Fast shutter speed, on the other hand, is used to stop motion to get sharp images of fast-moving subjects. And ISO refers to sensitivity of the camera sensor. It's a little bit hard to explain, but higher ISO means that the camera needs to amplify the signal that it gets from the sensor, so the result is a brighter image. But the side effect of that, it makes your picture more grainy. Higher the ISO is, more grain there will be. It's actually similar to capturing a dark photo and adjusting exposure later in post-processing. Either way, there will be noise in the image. Okay, now that you know that, let me explain how automatic mode in your phone works. Usually, your phone evaluates the available light and adjusts shutter speed and ISO accordingly. If you're shooting outdoors in daylight, of course, you won't have any problems. There will be enough light, so the phone will set your ISO as low as possible, and the shutter speed will be fast enough so you'll get sharp images even of moving subjects. But the problem is much more evident in low light. For example, if you're shooting indoors or outdoors at dusk. In low light, your phone will make a compromise. It will raise your ISO and extend shutter time, which is actually not a good idea. If you're shooting your kids at dusk, for example, you'll often get blurry images because they're moving all the time and your phone will set too long shutter speed. But if you're shooting in manual mode, you can set a shorter shutter speed and higher ISO to get sharp images at the same exposure. Of course, the image will have more noise, but in situations like this, I prefer grainier images over blurred. On the other hand, if you're shooting cityscape at dusk, you want less noise in your image. So, instead of letting the phone choose the settings, you can manually set ISO to as low as possible. Of course, you have to extend shutter speed, so you'll have to hold your phone as steady as possible or put it on a tripod, but that way you'll get a nice image without noise. So, how to shoot in manual mode? Most new Android phones already have this option in its native camera app. In some phones it's called Pro mode, or it can have some other name. But if you're an iPhone user, you'll have to download an app for that. There are a lot of apps that offer controls like this, but two that I like the most are Moment and Lightroom Mobile. We'll talk about useful apps to get the best out of your phone camera in my next video, so stay tuned for that. Tip number 9. Shoot with the best possible quality. When you buy a smartphone, the settings might not be set to the best quality that phone offers, especially if we talk about video. On iPhone, for example, the default resolution for video is Full HD, so if you want to shoot in 4K, you should first go into the settings and change it. And when you're capturing photos, shoot in RAW. And what's the difference? When you're shooting in RAW, you get all the information that comes from the camera sensor. It's actually unedited RAW data, and the benefits of shooting in RAW are huge. You have more control and flexibility in post-processing, you get wider dynamic range, you can recover more data from blown out highlights or from shadows, you get sharper images, and so on. And when you're shooting in JPEG, on the other hand, the camera bakes all that data like saturation, white balance, noise reduction into an image. That's why the quality is lower, and after post-processing a JPEG image, it gets even worse. Of course, there are also downsides. Firstly, RAW files are bigger than JPEG, so it takes more space, and secondly, you have to edit those images. RAW files usually look dark and dull, so you have to edit them. Also, if you want to send an image or publish it somewhere, RAW format will not work, so you have to convert them to JPEG first. To turn on RAW image capturing on your smartphone, newer Android phones have that option in their native camera app, but if you don't have that option or you own an Apple device, then you need to download an app for that. Both I've mentioned before, Lightroom and Moment, have the option to shoot RAW, so that's my recommendation. So that's it from me today, but don't miss the next video where we'll talk about some of these mobile apps and also about some gear that will make your mobile photos and videos even better. If you find this video useful, hit that like button, and if you want to learn more about photography and how to sell your photos and make some money, click on one of these links on the screen right now. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and also hit the bell so you'll be notified about my new videos, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in my next video.